Yotam Polizer is the global CEO of IsraAid, Israel's biggest humanitarian NGO, leading a team of 300 plus, currently active in 12 countries, including a large-scale operation to support communities in both Israel and Gaza following the October 7th attack. IsraAid is currently supporting 16 communities across the country, including Kibbutz Be'eri, near Oz, Nova survivors, and the Bedouin villages with mental health support, education, and relief. In Gaza, IsraAid is focusing on facilitating aid to the most vulnerable communities in close coordination with Israeli authorities and the world's largest humanitarian organizations. Yotam is the 2023 Charles Bronfman Award laureate. Following the August 2021 Afghanistan crisis, Yotam and partners led an operation to evacuate 167 at-risk Afghans from the hands of the Taliban. In September, thank you for covering for us. In September 2015, refugee crisis in Europe, he led IsraAid's humanitarian mission in Greece to support Syrian refugees on the island, and also established IsraAid Germany, which provides long-term support for Yazidi and Syrian refugees in Germany. During the last 15 years, Polizer has also built and led programs in Japan after the 2011 earthquake and tsunami, in the Philippines after Typhoon Haiyan in 2013, and in South Korea to support the reintegration of North Korean defectors. He has led missions to Nepal following the 2015 Gorkha earthquake, and in 2014 in Sierra Leone for Ebola survivors. He has 15 years' experience in education, humanitarian aid, and international development. Yotam serves on the board of directors of SID, Society of International Development, and the advisory board of Just Serve, an international service initiative. Yotam is a Schusterman Fellow. He graduated from Tel Aviv University and Israeli Open University, where he studied African Studies and International Relations. In addition to all of this, I can just say it makes us all so proud when there is such a crisis, whether it be in Greece or Haiti or the Philippines or South Korea, to see Israeli workers show up and offer aid with the Israeli flag on their shoulder. Thank you for always making us proud. Valley Beth Shalom welcomes Yotam Polizer.
Shabbat Shalom, Toda. Next time, remind me to invite my mom after this introduction.
This is why I always travel with my mom in the congregation, you see? So let's begin here with this question. Let's begin in the before times.
Yeah.
Before October 7th.
The world before.
The world before. In the world before, what was the mission of IsraAid, and what was your experience leading IsraAid?
So IsraAid was established in 2001, and we worked in 64 countries ever since. And our vision was to be sort of the humanitarian wing of the startup nation, and to use the expertise and the technology and the innovation and the skills that developed in Israel to help the world's most vulnerable communities. In fact, the vision was to help anywhere but in Israel. Not because there wasn't a need, but because there are other great organizations and hospitals and partners that work with us around the world. The mission was to help in countries that have diplomatic relations with Israel, in places that are best friends, like Guatemala, for example, a country that moved its embassy to Jerusalem and was the first one to speak for Israel at the UN, but who also work in places that don't have diplomatic relations with Israel, like Afghanistan, where I spent 2 months on the border in a Fauda-style operation to pull out almost 200 girls from the hands of the Taliban. So that was our mission. Everything changed on October 7th. And the first time, we took all of this expertise that we gained in the last 24 years and brought it back home. So, should I?
And what did that look like?
What did that look like? So, it actually took a bit longer, because whenever there is a crisis somewhere in the world, we have our emergency response team based out of Tel Aviv, ready to deploy in 2 to 3 hours. It's a team of doctors, engineers, psychologists, disaster responders. In the case of October 7th, it was so personal, it took us almost 24 hours, which is much longer. And the reason was that we were all looking for our loved ones. Thank God I personally didn't lose any immediate family member, but I lost someone who was very close to me, someone who was my mentor 15 years ago and inspired me to do the work I'm doing, someone who was actually a peace activist and was murdered in Kibbutz Be'eri. So it was very, very personal, but after 24 hours in the morning of October 8th, our emergency response team deployed for the first time in history in Israel, and we went to the Dead Sea, and you may have heard, but most of the communities who really suffered the worst atrocities on October 7th were evacuated to these makeshift refugee camps in the Dead Sea and in Eilat, and I'm sure many of you have visited there. These are, you have the hotels that had looked pretty much the same since the 80s. They all turned into one big refugee camp, and unfortunately, there aren't, I think, any organization in Israel that have experience in managing large-scale refugee crises like IsraAid. So that was our role. Our role is to manage these 16 evacuation sites for the kibbutzim, for the moshavim, for people who really went through the worst massacre. And the first thing we did there, which is something we're doing in refugee camps around the world, was to operate what we called child-safe spaces. So you can think about it a little bit like a kindergarten, like a preschool for kids, but it's run by trauma specialists. And you may think, why was that the first priority? That was the first priority, A, because we know now in Israel that if we're not starting to treat trauma from the first moment after the trauma, the chances of PTSD are much higher. And the whole country is traumatized, and it's an ongoing trauma, especially because of what's happening with the hostages. So treating children with trauma was a priority not only for the kids, but also for their parents. And I remember when I went to Kibbutz Be'eri, to this refugee camp where they were based, and we call this place safe space for kids. We said makom batuach in Hebrew. This mother from Kibbutz Be'eri told me, how can you say it's makom batuach? There is no makom batuach. There is no safe space.
Because in English, Yotam is saying safe space. In Hebrew, it's like a certain place, or like a makom batuach is like a promised place. And there was so much moving around.
There was so much moving around, and there were still...
Nothing was certain.
Nothing was certain. And I think for me, it was the first time it hit home, and it helped me understand the levels of trauma that we all have to deal with. And these people, especially who went through this terrible massacre, have to deal with. And I told her, you know what, you're right. We're not going to call it a safe space. We're just going to call it a space, makom. So that was the first thing we did in Israel. And we're still working with these communities to get back on their feet. I know we don't hear good news, so I will happily share with you some good news that most of these communities are back in their home right now. And I was just with them last week in Israel. 70% of the people from the south are back in their homes. And they're all talking about the concept, which I think is one of the most beautiful Jewish concepts that I use for my work, the concept of post-traumatic growth. How can we not just bounce back, but how can we bounce forward? How can we build back better? And this is the notion, this is the vision of these incredible communities. And of course, they will only be able to do it when their hostages return.
So we've actually had 2 missions from the synagogue go so far to volunteer and to help the war effort and to bear witness to the atrocities that occurred in the kibbutzim. We have visited so far Kfar Aza, and we visited Nir Yitzchak, and we've met with communities. The Kfar Aza community has come and visited VBS. I've sent shlichim messengers to talk about Shvaim, to talk about moving back to Ruchama, this whole process that's happening.
Yeah.
Explain to us how you walk alongside those communities in their different phases. Stages, exactly.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. You mentioned 2 communities that we work with very closely, and they're in a very different stages. Nir Yitzchak, a kibbutz, a beautiful community, they actually had, and I mean, all of these stories from October 7th were unbelievable, but their story was actually tragic, but it could have been much more tragic. And thanks to one of the free tanks that protected all of these communities on October 7th, almost the entire community was saved. Not all of them, unfortunately, but almost all of them. One tank basically protected the kibbutz from more than 400 terrorists who tried to attack on that day. And this kibbutz is now, after being in Eilat, in a hotel, and then moving to another temporary place, are now back in their homes, almost all of them. We operate there a trauma center, which is, we call it the Open Studio. It's a place for children and adults to practice art therapy, which we found to be a very effective tool for kids and adults to deal with their trauma. A lot of people don't talk about it, but through art, they can really express it. And when the kibbutz moved back to the original home, they said, IsraAid, you have to come with us. We still need you. So we decided to move our art therapy center from the hotel. It's a beautiful yurt. It's like a tent that we built for them. We moved it into the center of the kibbutz right now, and this is really the center of life in Yer Yitzchak. Kfar Aza, that you've known and really went through one of the worst massacres, still have few people in Gaza in captivity. They are moving now from Kibbutz Shfaim, which is a beautiful kibbutz near Herzliya that adopted them, to another kibbutz closer to their original home in Ruchama. They just finished building. I think they're really in the moving process right now. There, our main focus is actually the young people. Because when the terrorists came in on October 7th, the first neighborhood of the kibbutz that they attacked was where the younger generation lived. And disproportionately, the younger population of the kibbutz was impacted and traumatized. And what we're doing with them is taking them to healing retreats, is we're doing some leadership program with them. We're helping them build their own new initiative to support the kibbutz, because we know it's important for the kibbutz, but it's a very important part of their healing process. So that's what we're doing with Kfar Aza and Yer Yitzchak, and we're doing it with other communities. But we realized that, of course, there are other people who were deeply impacted by October 7th and the ongoing war. An obvious group is the Nova survivors, and I'm sure many of you have visited the exhibition here.
And visited the Nova site.
And visited the Nova site in the south. IsraAid took 1,200 Nova survivors to Cyprus. We partnered with a place called the Secret Forest, which is, pre-October 7th was a beautiful retreat place, kosher-friendly, vegan-friendly, you name it. And then the owner of this beautiful resort is an Israeli guy named Yoni Kahana. He called me. He said, I want to open it for Nova survivors so they can have a place they can actually sleep after October 7th. And we've heard, I'm sure you heard the news, the devastating news, that just a few weeks ago, one Nova survivor decided to end her life. So it was very clear that the level of trauma are so severe, and they just needed, again, a quiet place where they can start their healing process. And he thought 20 Nova survivors will show up, 1,200 signed in. And then he called IsraAid, he said, help me, we have to figure it out. So we started this beautiful project there in Cyprus. It's only 30 minutes flight, and when all flights were closed, Cyprus was still operating. And we took Nova survivors there, and a lot of them said it was the beginning of their healing process, and of course they continued their therapy in Israel. And then another community which was really unheard of in the news, but have suffered tremendously, is the Bedouin community. The Bedouin community in southern Israel, first of all, quite a few Bedouins risked their life to save Jews, especially in the Nova. There are a lot of stories of Bedouins who went in and out to rescue people. There are Bedouins who were murdered. There are Bedouins who were kidnapped. They are Israeli citizens. And many Bedouins did not have bomb shelter. In fact, the only person who was injured in the Iranian attack in April was a Bedouin 80-year-old, Israeli Bedouin 80-year-old Muslim girl who didn't have a bomb shelter. So we decided to do something I never thought we will in Israel, which is to build bomb shelter near schools in the Bedouin community, and we built 62 shelters. We're just scratching the surface. The need is in the thousands. But it allows these kids to continue the school and provide some basic protection.
So you're the first speaker, Shechianu moment. You're the first speaker here who can talk about the efforts not only for the Muslim population inside of Israel, the Israeli Arab community, but you can speak about the efforts that are going on inside of Gaza. And when I read your bio and I read about IsraAid it seems like a strange thing to do if our goal is to perpetrate genocide. So we're being accused of genocide all over the world, right? We have morally bankrupted institutions like the United Nations that actually paid for the genocide to occur, the massive attack to occur on October 7th, right? They employ UNRWA employees that perpetrated the attacks, murdered Jewish children. They've taught their Gaza population to be raised like this. And now it's thought by the world that the IDF wants to come in and eliminate that population entirely, prevent them from eating, drinking, anything. And yet there are people like you that can attest here in front of the community that Jews are being sent in to facilitate food, water, medicine. Tell us a little bit about what's going on inside of Gaza. And I think this is only, the reason that this accusation is being made is because it's a logical accusation. Meaning to say, if October 7th happened to any other people, obviously we would genocide them. Obviously anybody would eliminate that people completely. Only Jews, the reason they can't understand is only Jews would risk our lives to feed the people that want to massacre our children again. And so tell us a little bit about what's going on inside of Gaza.
Well, you certainly show the absurdity of this situation. But even before Gaza, and actually I want to share with you, we have a special guest here that I didn't have a chance to introduce you, who has been a long-term partner of ours in other place that was considered our enemies, in Syria, next door. So we have friend Shadi. Can you stand up for a second? Shadi is from the city of Aleppo, Syria. And after the Assad regime, with the help of Hezbollah and the Iranian, attacked Aleppo, he fled and he made it to the US. And then partnering with IsraAid, but not just with IsraAid, with the IDF, for many years, Shadi led an operation to bring aid from Israel to Syria. And if we're seeing the news and what's happening right now in Syria, he was just showing me a picture of the hospital that he used to manage, liberated from the Assad regime and from Hezbollah by the hand of Israel. When we, Israel, took out Nasrallah, Shadi was sending me thank you messages from the Syrian people. So while the world is going against Israel, we have friends in uncommon places. And I remember when I was in Greece in 2015, and we pulled out a boat, a group of Syrians after a boat was capsized, and I was carrying this 4-year-old Syrian girl, and I handed her over to our doctor who treated her. Her father came to me and spoke fluent English. He said, "My worst enemy became my biggest supporter. And the people who are supposed to protect me back home in Syria are chasing me away." When we pulled out these girls from the hands of the Taliban, they had no idea until they were out that they were being rescued by Israelis. And now each and every one of them is sending me Shabbat Shalom every week. And last year when I won the Bronfman Award, the keynote speaker was the captain of the Afghan girls robotics team. The most beautiful, heartwarming note I received after October 7th was from the former Afghan ambassador to the US. When I was on the border of Afghanistan, we realized that many of these girls didn't have passports. So this guy, who was no longer the ambassador because he's not representing the Taliban, had extra passports, and he printed his passport and sent it to us, and we got it across the border to get this girl out to safety. So that we have this experience of how the world sees us in one light. And by the way, this story in Afghanistan, even our great friends in the CNN, our great friends, could not ignore. So a lot of people are asking me, how come we don't hear? Even some of these stories came out, not enough. In the case of Gaza, it's very complicated and very sensitive, so I can't share all the details. But I will say that our headquarters in the center of Tel Aviv is on the 12th floor, and on the 15th floor of the same building, there is the Kogat unit of the IDF. The role of Kogat unit, the official role, is to facilitate aid into Gaza and to make sure it's not reaching Hamas, which is very, very complicated. They reached out to us. We're their neighbors. They met us in the elevator. And they told us, we need your help, guys. You are Israelis. We trust you. We know you understand the Israeli security concerns. On the other hand, you are a globally recognized humanitarian organization. You need to help us find alternatives to UNRWA. You need to help us find organization that can actually deliver aid to the people and not just focused on bashing Israel. So that's the work we're doing. And I think it's very important, not just because it's the right thing to do and it's the Jewish thing to do, but it's the only way we can build a platform for the day after. So this is an effort we're doing together with Shadi, with other friends from the Emirates, our new best buddies. And I have to tell you, when I went to the communities in the kibbutzim that really suffered the worst massacre, I went to the head of Kibbutz Re'im, just outside the Nova Festival, and I told him we're doing that because I was worried. We're not publishing this effort right now because it's very sensitive. But I went there and told them because I knew it could leak. You know, when I told it to her, she told me it's the most hopeful thing she heard since October 7 because she said, somebody is thinking about the day after. And that's what we're trying to do.
So, first of all, Shadi, Bruchim Habayim. Shukran for everything that you do for the Jewish people, all right, on behalf of us.
And
I only speak a little bit
for
of
our
Arabic.
neighbors.
And for our neighbors. Shukran, thank you. Shabbat Shalom. In 2013, I had a transformative experience. I visited Syrian mutilated children from the war that were being helped in the hospital in Sfat. And I visited them as a group of young American rabbis. And it was life-changing to talk to their parents about the way that their whole worldview had changed after Israel rescued them from the war. So thank you for being such a spokesperson. Let me end here because you're going to stay afterwards and you're going to be mobbed by people and you're going to wish that you had bodyguards. IsraAid has pivoted inward in a way that so much of this last year the Jewish people have pivoted inward. Right. We've all become more insular. We've all focused on our inner tribe. But IsraAid is actually one of our best ambassadors. At its core, it was created to be an ambassador of the Jewish people, an ambassador of the state of Israel. And so do you think that there will be a day soon when Israel is once again able and welcomed into helping in the arena of global disasters? So I think one of the best kept secret, and we don't want that part to be a secret, so that's where we really need all of your help as ambassadors for Israel and for the Jewish people, is the fact that we never stopped. We haven't stopped. And just before October 7th, it looks like 10 years ago, but there was an earthquake in Morocco. And we sent our team there, and we're still operating there. We are working in Ukraine with 60 people on the ground. Now, thankfully, I'm thanking our good old friend COVID. And yeah, that sounds weird. But because during COVID, we realized that we can't just fly Israelis all over the place. And you know, I know people know us as these Michigan Israelis always jumping on plane. And it's part of who we are. But even more important, we're not just first in, we're last out. And right now, out of our 450 employees, the majority are locals who are proudly wearing the IsraAid t-shirt and are trained by our Israeli professionals and are leading the work in 14 countries around the world, still as we speak. Now, two very interesting countries that we're still working on right now. One of them is Malawi, Africa, where there is no access to clean water, and we're using Israeli water technology to provide access to clean water. There was a terrible cyclone there last year. Malawi has been one of the greatest friends of Israel and the Jewish people. You know, if you look at the few countries that consistently vote for us in the UN, Malawi is one of them. And we're working very closely there with the president, and they're also planning to move their embassy to Jerusalem. Another country which is the opposite, and took an opposite stand after October 7th, is Colombia. Colombia, we've been working there with people who survived the civil war and with Venezuelan refugees
Colombia, their current leadership, not the former one, which was actually very much with us, their current leadership decided to cut the ties to Israel after October 7th. I thought that means that we have to pull out our team, even though it's made mainly of locals. The same day, we got a phone call for 3 mayors in the cities where we operate, and they said, don't you dare leave. We need you guys, and we're going to protect you. So this work around the world is so important, A, because it's saving lives, it's the right thing to do, and it's the Jewish thing to do, but it's also, I really strongly believe, the only way to build bridges and change people's perspective, and we need to do both.
Well, so everyone here in the congregation, if you would like to make a contribution to the Israel Emergency Fund here at VBS will be making a contribution to IsraAid to help support your work. In the American Jewish community, it is a misnomer that there are social justice Jews and that there are Zionist Jews. And that divide we see really widening in our youngest generation. And the reason why it's a misnomer is because the greatest instrument for social justice for Jews is actually the state of Israel. And the greatest representative that we have traveling the world today in terms of when we show up to help people, they're usually wearing the Israeli flag on their shoulder. And so I want to thank IsraAid for creating for us that image in these places. I'll never forget hearing about the first baby born in Haiti after the earthquake was named Israel, after the work that the IsraAid teams did. And it's really an honor to have you here in our community, and we hope we get a chance to host you again.
Thank you. Toda rabba. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.